CBSNews.com, live and direct from UN headquarters in New York City. And this is Bubbling Under and Bubbling Over. Bubbling over this week, Mali, Malala, very high tech, very low tech, and a big prize. Mali, thanks to the efforts of the French Diplomatic Corps, has come to the forefront of world attention with the Security Council unanimously adopting a resolution that says within 45 days, the Union, the Economic Community of West African States, is to come back with a set of modalities and minor points about how they are going to proceed to put an armed intervention group along with the African Union into northern Mali. Northern Mali, you will remember, was the place where on the 22nd of March of this year, young officers who had been fighting an insurgent movement turned their arms against the elected government of the country, overthrew the president, and in effect seceded from the southern part of Mali. In part, this is because that nation has been sideswiped by the Arab Spring. Soldiers, people who had been working, people who had been simply trying to find a way of life in Libya, returned back home to Mali with arms, with all kinds of plans, and with not many jobs. And they had created an insurgent movement of a radical Muslim type that has taken a state that was gradually and very successfully pushing into modernity, split it apart. They've destroyed some of the ancient historic landmarks of Islamic and Muslim culture in Timbuktu, and the country is essentially in chaos. The temporary president for this month of the Security Council, Ambassador Rosenthal of Guatemala, said the situation is so dire that action has to be taken quickly. And the United Nations, with all the great powers assent, is moving to get the West African community and the African Union to do something to stop the downward spiral and deterioration of values in Mali. Malala Yousafzai, a 14-year-old girl, has become the center of world attention. Malala has become one of those one-word names that's known throughout the world. Malala is the young girl who's been campaigning for girls' literacy, for the right to go to school for several years. She was a blogger for the BBC under a pseudonym. This week, the Taliban targeted her. She was on a school bus, or a truck acting as a school bus. The Taliban came, surrounded the school bus, asked specifically of the children on the bus who was Malala, and then shot her. This during the week that was announced to be by the United Nations the first International Day of Girl Children. In reaction, the Secretary General of the United Nations, a man who, for all his virtues, is not noted for his eloquence, was incredibly eloquent. The attack on her was abhorrent and cowardly. The terrorists showed what frightened them most: a girl with a book. A girl with a book. Malala has become the symbol for the struggle for equality in education, for the right to join the modern world. The New York Times had this headline today, this picture of a boy in tears. Perhaps the girl with a book slogan is not enough. Malala is all of us. We are Malala. By an ironic and now tragic, poignant chance, the New York Times' wonderful videographer in Pakistan, Adam Ellick, has done a documentary on her, capturing her spirit, her drive to allow education to enlighten the world of women. It's available on YouTube. Anyone can watch it.
I want to become a but I see a great potential in my daughter that she can do more than a doctor. She can create a society where a medical student would be easily able to get her doctorate degree.
Seeing it now, especially after her words about hope, how she won't give up, how she's trying to bring a new enlightenment to save her people, to save girls, and to save the troubled Swat Valley, rings so painfully. We are all Malala. Malala's sin was blogging, using her computer to tell the rest of the world what she was thinking to advocate girls' literacy. To have a computer means to be connected to the world and the web. Threatening from the outside, we are told this week, is a cyber attack. A cyber attack that could bring down the entire infrastructure that supports the World Wide Web. A cyber attack that could bring down the software, hardware that keeps Western countries going. This is a warning from Leon Panetta, one that should be taken seriously. And we're told by the Washington Post, we're told by the Wall Street Journal, that the threat of a cyber attack is coming specifically out of Iran, out of a small group of hackers who have government support. We know they're hackers in other less than open societies. China and Russia come to mind. But the idea that Iran is taking revenge for the sanctions that are crippling its economy by targeting Western institutions is a chilling notion. On the other hand, this week has brought a notion that there is cooperation, at least in one old area, between Iran and the West. The border guards in Iran are acting to stop the smuggling of heroin and opium. Heroin and opium coming out of Afghanistan. Afghanistan grows 90% of the world's crop in heroin. Heroin is the agent that carries to Central Asia, to the states of the former Soviet Union, in Central Asia and in Russia, AIDS, a health menace. So there's an urgency on all sides as the United Nations watches NATO withdraw its troops from Afghanistan. There is an urgency to control the flow of heroin that's being grown there. The NATO forces, the United States, have either been turning their back, winking, or pushing heroin growing into new regions. When NATO and the United States leaves, will there be a bumper boomer crop in poppies, heroin, and thus more heroin addicts, more people coming down with AIDS? No one seems to be doing much about this. This is an issue bubbling under. And finally this week, bubbling over is irony, resentment, some pride, and some bewilderment at the latest Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize was awarded this week to the European Economic Community. There have been Nobel Prizes in the past that have gotten some question. A Nobel Prize to Barack Obama for not being George Bush. The Wall Street Journal featured a long article today asking questions about the irony of the timing. The European Union is challenged by an economic downturn, by disintegration, by the perhaps loss of countries like Spain and Greece from its membership. But the underlying reality, something that says more than this was an April Fool's joke, as some people in Europe have been discussing, the underlying reality is something much more basic and something that Bubbling Under, Bubbling Over has been tackling for months. The citation lauds the European Union for overcoming petty nationalism, hormonal nationalism, divisions between countries, reflexive hostility, the kind of activity that's driving Japan and China against each other over a bunch of silly little islands, silly in themselves, not silly because they represent history and the potential for oil discoveries. Dampening down nationalism is a great accomplishment. Nationalism, once again, is seen as a cause of conflict and perhaps change. Change not for the better, but for the worse in the world. And so the European Union's prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, goes not for what it's wrestling with today, but what it's done since the mid-1950s, dampening down very rampant hormonal nationalism. And for that, the Nobel Committee, which seems to put its foot in it with the Peace Prize every once in a while, may have put its finger on a sore point in world life. For ICAST News, live and direct from the United Nations in New York City, for Bubbling Under and Bubbling Over, I'm Jonathan Sanders.